Read line 14 again. 5 words from a 78-year-old farmer were about to erase a $90 million project. This is how he did it. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Hamilton County Title Office held 11 people that Tuesday morning, and 10 of them were billing by the hour. The 11th was a 78-year-old farmer named Harold Whitaker, sitting alone on one side of a 20-foot mahogany table, wearing a pressed flannel shirt and his dead wife's reading glasses on a cord around his neck. Across from him, Preston Hale, lead counsel for Bradford Development Group, slid a settlement agreement across the polished wood and clicked his pen. "Mr. Whitaker, this is the last offer. $340,000. You sign today, or we let the court decide what your little farm is worth." Harold didn't touch the paper. He reached into a worn canvas bag, pulled out a photocopy so old the type had gone soft at the edges, and set it gently on the table. "Before I sign anything," he said, "I'd like you to read line 14. Hale smirked, skimmed it, shrugged. Harold leaned forward, just an inch. Read line 14. Again. And what happened in the next 90 seconds would erase a $90 million project, end 2 careers, and prove that the most dangerous man in any room is the one everybody stopped listening to. But to understand what was written on that page, you have to go back 63 years. Cedar Run Valley, Ohio. 1962, 211 acres of bottomland so rich, the old-timers said you could plant a fence post and harvest lumber. The Whitaker family had worked it since 1919. Through the Depression, through 2 wars, through the drought of '54 that killed half the farms in the county, and through the middle of it, cutting the property almost perfectly in 2, ran Cedar Run Creek. Now, to a developer, a creek is a drainage problem. To a farmer, a creek is everything. It watered the herd. It fed the irrigation pond. In August, when the sky turned white and stayed that way, Cedar Run was the difference between a harvest and an auction. And 62 years later, that same quiet creek would be the difference between a $90 million development and the most expensive mistake in Bradford's history. But nobody knew that yet. Harold's father, Emmett Whitaker, understood something most men of his generation didn't. He understood paper. Emmett had watched his own neighbors lose farms in the 30s, not to weather, not to laziness, but to documents. A missed clause, a quiet lien, a bank man with a smile and a folded page. He used to say, "Son, land is taken with paper long before it's taken with fences." So, in 1962, when the county rebuilt the Valley Road and the property lines were redrawn, Emmett Whitaker sat down with a young attorney named Carl Brubaker, and together they wrote a new deed for the Whitaker farm. Most of it was standard. Boundaries, descriptions, survey markers. But Emmett paid Brubaker $40 extra. That's about $400 today. To add 14 specific lines of protective language, old language, the kind lawyers call archaic, right up until the moment it beats them. And then Emmett did something else. He made his son copy the entire deed by hand. Harold was 14 that summer. He'd skipped his chores twice to swim with the Peterson boys, and his father's punishment wasn't the belt, and it wasn't the barn. It was the kitchen table, a fountain pen, and that deed, copied out word by word, twice. Harold hated every minute of it. He would hate it for another 61 years, right up until the morning it became the most valuable thing he owned. Harold married Margaret in 1969. They raised 3 kids and 4,000 harvests worth of worry on that land. And when Margaret passed in 2019, Harold buried her on the East Rise, where you can hear the creek. And he kept her reading glasses on a cord around his neck. The lenses were too weak for his eyes. He wore them anyway. The letters started arriving in March of 2024. Bradford Development Group, Columbus, Ohio. A company with a gold logo and a 2-page glossy brochure showing a place called Cedar Run Commons. 1,400 homes. A retail plaza. A golf course shaped like a kidney bean. All of it drawn directly on top of the Whitaker farm. Bradford had spent 3 years quietly buying the valley. The Peterson place, sold. The Kowalski Dairy, sold. 11 properties, 1,800 acres, $62 million committed. And one stubborn rectangle of dirt, right in the middle, with an old man on it. Their first offer was $210,000. Harold read the letter twice at the kitchen table, folded it, and used it to level the short leg of the porch step. The second offer was $280,000. The third came with a visit. Daniel Voss, vice president of land acquisition, arrived in a truck that had never carried anything heavier than a briefcase. He stood on Harold's porch, smiled like a billboard, and explained, slowly, the way you'd talk to a child, that the county was very excited about this project, that there were tax benefits, that holdouts, his word, holdouts tend to do worse in the long run, Harold. Harold offered him coffee. Voss declined. And on his way down the steps, he said the sentence he would come to regret more than any other in his career. Look, the lawyers will paper over whatever's out here. You people never keep your records straight anyway. You people, Harold stood on that porch for a long time after the truck left. Then he went inside, took a legal pad off the shelf, and wrote one line at the top in pencil. Let them finish talking. By autumn, Bradford stopped asking and started pushing. Their attorneys filed a petition with the county to, quote, modernize and consolidate legacy parcel records in the valley. It sounded harmless, administrative, boring on purpose. Buried inside it was a request to extinguish, quote, obsolete easements and appurtenances of no current material use. In plain English, erase the old paperwork, including a certain 14 lines, written in 1962, that nobody at Bradford had actually read. At the county hearing, Harold rose to speak. Voss leaned toward Hale and whispered, loud enough, on purpose, here we go. The holdout's going to tell us about his creek. The room chuckled. Harold spoke for 40 seconds. He didn't mention the creek. He asked one question, whether the county had certified copies of all valley deeds prior to 1970. And when the clerk said yes, he thanked her, and he sat down. Bradford's table smiled at each other. They thought they'd watched an old man run out of words. They had just watched a man confirm his ammunition. Here's what Bradford never learned about Harold Whitaker, because they never asked. Every deed, every easement, every water right, tax receipt, and boundary survey touching that farm since 1919. Harold had read them all, not skimmed, read. It was the one inheritance his father had truly left him, the discipline to read what other men only sign. And Harold knew, had known since the first glossy brochure, exactly what was sitting in line 14 of the 1962 deed. He could have said it at the hearing, could have ended it all in March. He didn't. Why? Because his father had taught him the second rule of paper, too. Never show a man your fence line while he's still buying lumber. If Harold revealed it early, while Bradford had spent $62 million, they'd find a way around it. Lawyers, given time, are excellent carpenters, but if he waited, if he let them pour their concrete promises to investors, let them sign their pre-sale agreements, let them commit every last dollar to a design that could not exist without his land and his water, then the 14 lines wouldn't be a problem for them to solve. They'd be a wall. So through that winter, Harold did 3 things. Quietly, he drove to the county recorder's office and paid $11.50 for a certified copy of the 1962 deed. The clerk, a young woman named, we'll meet her soon, stamped it in red and never thought about it again. He wrote one letter to Carl Brubaker's old firm, the attorney who drafted the deed, and confirmed the original was still in file. It was sealed, intact, and he called his granddaughter, Beth, a school teacher in Dayton, and asked her to teach him how to use a document scanner. "What are you scanning, Grandpa?" "Homework," he said. Meanwhile, Bradford's machine rolled forward. Roads were graded on the Peterson Place. Model homes framed on the Kowalski Dairy, their investor deck. Harold would learn this later in Discovery, listed the Whitaker parcel as, quote, pending acquisition, low risk, elderly owner, no counsel retained, limited sophistication. Limited sophistication. They put it in writing. Remember that phrase. It has a price tag. We'll get to it. The final settlement conference was set for a Tuesday in April. 4th floor, Hamilton County Title Office. Bradford brought 6 people. Harold brought a canvas bag. They'd raised the offer to $340,000 and attached a deadline. Signed today, or face condemnation proceedings, where, as Hale put it, the court will likely value the property well below our generous number. That part was a bluff. Harold knew it was a bluff. He let them make it anyway. Preston Hale ran the meeting like a man late for a better one. He laid out the paperwork. He talked about market comps and holdout risk. Daniel Voss sat beside him, doing the thing powerful men do when they've already spent your future, checking his watch. At the end of the table sat Jenny Morales, 26, junior paralegal, the person whose job it was to carry the document boxes no one opened. She'd grown up on a dairy farm outside Eau Claire, Wisconsin. She'd been watching the old man in the flannel shirt all morning, because he reminded her of someone, and because he was the only person in the room who didn't look nervous. "Mr. Whitaker," Hale said, tapping his papers twice on the table. $340,000. You sign today or we let the court decide what your little farm is worth. And that is the moment we began with. The canvas bag, the soft-edged photocopy, sliding across 20 feet of mahogany. "Before I sign anything, I'd like you to read line 14. Hale sighed, the sigh of a man humoring a child. He picked it up, skimmed. "It's a water clause, Mr. Whitaker. Your deed references creek access. We know. Our engineers have planned around your parcel." Harold took off Margaret's glasses, folded them, set them down. "Read line 14. Again." "Mr. Whitaker, we don't have time." "Out loud, son." Something in the room shifted. Maybe it was the sun. Maybe it was the stillness of a man with nothing to check his watch for. Hale looked down and read it out loud. Line 14. The waters of Cedar Run, together with a protective corridor of 100 feet, on either bank, as it crosses the described lands and all lands adjoining upstream and downstream within the original 1919 Whitaker Survey, are hereby granted in perpetual conservation easement to the heirs of Emmett Whitaker, such easement to run with the land, senior to all subsequent conveyances, and extinguishable by no party, save the named heirs themselves. Silence. The kind of silence that has a temperature. Jenny Morales was the first to understand. You could see it land on her face, because here's what those old words meant in modern money. The easement didn't just cover Harold's farm. It ran with the creek through the original 1919 survey, which, before the land was divided and sold off over the decades, had covered most of the valley floor. Through the Peterson Place, through the Kowalski Dairy, through 11 of the 12 parcels, Bradford had spent $62 million assembling a 100-foot protected corridor on both banks. senior to every deed Bradford owned, crossing directly through the planned retail plaza, 91 home lots, and the entire back nine of the golf course. They had bought the valley. Emmett Whitaker had already owned the water and a 200-foot ribbon of untouchable land wrapped around it since 1962, and the only people on Earth who could release that easement were the named heirs, all of whom, as of 2019, came down to one 78-year-old man sitting at the far end of a mahogany table, putting his wife's glasses back on their cord. Hale read it a third time. Nobody asked him to. Voss grabbed the page. This is... Nobody flagged this. This can't be enforceable. It's 60 years old. 63, Harold said. We'll challenge it. Our title company cleared these parcels. Harold reached into the canvas bag one last time and set a red-stamped certified copy on the table next to a letter confirming the original, sealed and intact, at Brubaker and Sons, attorneys at law. Your title company read summaries, Harold said quietly. My father paid $40 for 14 lines and made me copy them out by hand when I was a boy. Twice. He stood, buttoned his coat. You told the county my family never kept our records straight. He slid the settlement agreement, unsigned, back down the table. We kept them for 105 years. We were just waiting for somebody to ask. Bradford Development Group spent 8 months and $1.1 million in legal fees trying to break line 14. They failed. The language Emmett had paid $40 for in 1962 was, in the words of the judge who dismissed their final challenge, unambiguous, deliberate, and ironclad. Cedar Run Commons collapsed in February. The investor lawsuit started in March, and that internal memo, the one describing Harold as having limited sophistication, was read aloud in a deposition, word by word by word. Daniel Voss resigned before he could be fired. Preston Hale's firm quietly lost the Bradford account, worth $2.3 million a year. The 11 parcels sold at a loss to a regional land trust, which approached Harold with a very different kind of proposal, a conservation partnership protecting the entire creek corridor permanently, with a stewardship payment to the Whitaker family of $51,000 a year for life, renewable to his heirs. Harold signed that one. After reading it, every line. And Jenny Morales, the paralegal from the dairy farm, quit Hale's firm 3 weeks later. She works for the land trust now. Last spring, she helped plant 1,100 sycamore saplings along a 100-foot corridor on both banks of Cedar Run, where the golf course was supposed to go. Harold Whitaker still farms 211 acres in Cedar Run Valley. He still wears Margaret's glasses on a cord around his neck. And in the top drawer of the kitchen table, there's a photocopy of a deed from 1962, soft at the edges, next to a legal pad with one line written in pencil. Let them finish talking. Some men collect power. Harold collected paper and patience. So here's the question we'll leave you with. Harold knew about line 14 for over a year and said nothing while they spent $62 million. Would you have done the same? Or would you have shown your hand early? Tell us in the comments. And if stories like this one matter to you, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who kept the paper, subscribe to Held Ground.